When William Jennings Bryan entered the prestigious Whipple Academy in 1875, he discovered he wasn't as naturally brilliant of a student as he once assumed. In fact, for a kid who had been homeschooled by his mother, Bryan was decidedly lacking in some areas. Some of the other kids were the sons of doctors, scientists, and industrial tycoons, and they excelled in subjects William found impossibly dense. Subjects like classical studies or learning the German language from textbooks. They had some hidden advantage that William lacked. But William had two aces up his sleeve. First, he was willing to outwork his competition. From the Mississippi Valley Historical Review, quote, William did not acquire knowledge with facility, but he was conscientious and industrious in painstaking study. And his second hidden ace, to everyone's surprise, was that Bryan had an actual, honest-to-God superpower. He was incredibly, stunningly, stupidly good at public speaking.
If they dare to come out in the open field and defend the gold standard as a good thing, we will fight them to the uttermost.
And he'd been practicing it since he was 6 years old. Bryan struggled with subjects like German and classics, but he excelled at ethics, political science, and literature, because those were the classes where he was allowed to stand up and speak, which was sometimes so compelling he changed the professor's opinions on key political subjects. To everyone's surprise, he graduated valedictorian. Then he stunned everyone again by entering the post-graduation debate club tournament, nearly winning the whole damn thing. Bryan placed second, but by all accounts, including the college newspaper and the woman who actually won the tournament, William should have placed first overall. He was that good. William didn't just struggle at school. He was bad at propriety, too. Just out of college, he nearly ruined the reputation of Mary Bard, his sweetheart, by sneaking around to date her. He even got her suspended from the girls' academy. And when she took the train home to beg forgiveness from her parents, William tagged along. Why? Because he knew if he was allowed to speak to her parents, he would use his superpower on them. He could convince them. And of course it worked. Mary's father agreed to let them continue seeing each other. An impossible outcome, considering how badly he had already hurt her reputation. Even after graduating as a lawyer, William is bad at finding traditional law work. So he walked his way into a job that should have been off limits to him. He convinces a saloon owner to let William do his debt collecting, which is odd for William because he just opened a law practice and he doesn't drink, not even a little. But William argues that people who do drink ought to pay for it. Later, William Jennings got into politics by campaigning for other Democrats like Julius Sterling Morton and Grover Cleveland. But when he decides to campaign for himself, he chooses to run for Congress in Nebraska, a state that's never voted Democrat, ever. But William walked into the assembly as an unknown, took the stage, and began speaking. When people heard his voice and listened to his stories and heard his impassioned arguments, they flipped. William's power of persuasion was practically magical. Not only did he gain the Democratic nod and the public support and the Republican voters, he even became the first Democrat congressman in Nebraska to defeat incumbent Republican William James Connell. By now you might be thinking, William sounds impressive, but this is all still pretty small potatoes. Convincing some local to give him a job, to let him marry a debutante, or to let him run for Congress. But that's just the start of his epic speaking career. Over the course of his spree, William Jennings Bryan would fight against monopolies, wealth institution, robber barons, and crooked bank structures. He would be given titles like the Great Commoner and the Boy Orator. And he would be chosen by the Democratic Party as their presidential candidate so many times that beating Bryan was like beating the final boss for celebrity Republicans on their way to the White House. That's how good he was at public speaking. But there's a reason you may have never heard the name William Jennings Bryan. Like we said, He chose to do battles against giants. And over again, Bryan put his head in the political guillotine by running for office against Republicans who had made alliances with monopolies. Bryan lost over and over, and history is quick to forget the losers. But Bryan still received more grassroots support than any other political candidate. In fact, to date, no man or woman has ever racked up so many political votes for president throughout their career without actually holding the office. Bryan may have never sat in the big chair, but he became dangerously close to taking it without making backdoor handshake deals with corporations. Truly, Bryan had a superpower. He could stand on a podium or in a parlor and talk his way into almost anything. Today, we're going to discover how. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-duh on the internet.
The post-internet world seems to have forgotten that the purpose of argument isn't to prove how right you are, but to win the other people to your side. True public debate shouldn't be about scoring points off the opposing side, making them entrench themselves deeper in their beliefs, but about making them reconsider their beliefs. And yet, YouTube, Facebook, and X are inundated with professional debaters who make their money posting gotcha videos of themselves arguing with voters in the streets.
He's not afraid to debate anybody.
Oh, no.
I mean, except for Nikki Haley.
Or they cash in by making reaction videos to House committee meetings or political debates, posting titles like, "Watch this politician get destroyed during a hearing," or "Liberal cries salty tears after losing argument," or "Republican representative stunned speechless after being owned."
Well, how dare you attack the physical appearance of another person?
Are your feelings hurt?
Her words down.
Aww.
Oh, girl, baby girl.
Oh, really?
This is the high-pressure atmosphere anyone under the age of 20 has grown up inside. We've raised 2 generations now who think that winning an argument means the other person has to be in tears. Except, that's not how we win anything. As we've seen from our polarized political parties and our social media bubbles, that's not how to convince the other side to support our causes either. So those are the first few myths we want to bust about debate, argument, and how to convince anyone to see your side of things. Myth 1. How did we all get so awful at debate seemingly overnight? Who decided that the best way to win an argument was to make the other side cry salty tears? Myth 2. Who benefits from having such a dysfunctional communication landscape? We certainly don't. So who's cashing our checks while we're busy screaming at each other in the Arby's parking lot? Myth 3. What does the high road even look like anymore? And if you're not willing to fight tooth and nail for your opinion, doesn't that make you weak?
Okay, first question. Why debate? Because this is going to end up being 3 episodes, potentially 4 if we release one as a bonus. Today is hopefully going to cover Jennings Bryan and why you should want to argue and debate specifically to get the good things in life, and why everybody online doesn't do that. So that's part 1, is arguing for respect. And then part 2 will be the second half of Jennings Bryan's life and rise in political power. And that'll be what is effectively sophistry, and what are people doing? Like, well, why is everyone using debate wrong? Why are they using it for profit online, which is basically the shallowest form of getting paid? And then part 3 will be the end of Jennings' life, which is the Scopes monkey trial, the argument about teaching evolution versus teaching the Bible in schools, why we're still having that argument, and the focus morally for us will be how do you win an argument. So like our final episode hopefully will be, here's how to tomahawk dunk on people who are trying to argue with you, if that's what you want to do. But the first 2 episodes are supposed to be convincing you shouldn't do that. You don't make friends that way, and you don't get the good things in life that way. But but why this subject in general? If it's going to be such a massive piece of our archive, Todd, why did you want to do episodes about debate and argument specifically?
What I was really thinking about was I just do a lot of reflecting on this episode with just debating. You know, I was on a debate club and stuff. Doesn't it seem like just a power to be, I don't want to say more clever, but just more intelligent than anybody, just to be superior? Doesn't it feel like a superior power to win an argument?
One would think, but I'm as an older person, I don't think that's true. Like being intelligent oftentimes seems to make you worse at debating in my limited experience.
Because
like
things are more complicated. They're not black and white, right? So then you kind of say, well, it depends, you know?
Yeah, if you and I are arguing about the price of gas, as somebody who's read up and like knows a few things about the economy, and I've like studied deeply. I haven't, by the way. I don't know anything about gas, but let's suppose I know things, and I'm talking about it. I'm like, okay, well, you know, there's sourcing problems, and there's like the pipeline, and we also have to talk about labor. And instead of you arguing all of the many intricate points that go into an issue, you just say, you know, a mother of 4 can't buy gasoline at the pump. She has to go home with an empty car and she can't make it to work. How bad is that? You take a very simple emotional standpoint. You win the argument. Like I may win on intelligent debate points, but you will convince people. And I think that's a better power to have. And that's kind of we're having a 2-part episode about argument, debate, and like how to win people over. I guess I'm going into this thinking that simpler mode of mind, the tell them an emotional story, I think that wins, and we may prove that wrong or right. What is your thought on it? Have you always? We've talked so much about intelligence on these episodes. I kind of think that you value intelligence very highly. Do you think that would serve you in a debate capacity? Like, does that help you win arguments?
I was raised in sales where what it was you shoot down people's objections. So if you say something, I counter that with something. It was almost like a trial, right? And so everything that you say that you don't want to buy, I tell you why you should. But it's very confrontational, and it's kind of like, haha, I got you, kind of. And I never felt comfortable doing it. And then the new sales processes came out where you did the exact opposite, where you agreed with everybody. And whatever they said, no matter how ridiculous, because you were basing it more on good feelings. And instead of shooting down everything they said, you agreed with everything. So you got them to say yes more than you got them to say no. And it was so much more effective. It was less confrontational. And I felt more comfortable doing it. And I felt like that's how it was socially when you meet somebody. You compliment them. You like the same things they do. You eat food you don't like because you like them, you know? And I don't know if that's manipulation or if that's just good social lubrication, you know?
I think that might get at the absolute heart of arguing and convincing people is I think we're talking about, I think the two are two different things. I think that what you're talking about, making somebody feel exhausted and making somebody feel wrong about something or just trying to counter them, I don't think that works anymore. Like I don't know that it ever worked unless you have somebody unless there's literally a third person keeping score or a judge keeping track of your argument. I don't think it works in the real world.
Well, there's this monster best-selling book, and it came out, I think, in 1996, and it was titled this one's a great title, How to Argue and Win Every Time. And it was by Jerry Spence. And I read this book, and he was this just hardcore attorney who had done it all, you know, this worldly guy. And the whole book was about getting people to see your side of it, not telling them they were wrong. It was marketed as to, you know, I can kick anyone's ass, but that's what it wasn't what it was about. And so that made a big impression on me. I thought, oh, so even this guy who's got all these, you know, all these credentials and has done more than most people on earth, he even knows he just wants to soften them and get them to see things his way.
So you're coming into this with like possibly the best source for this. Like that sounds like the most valuable way to approach an argument. But we want to start at the beginning. If you're good with this, I think part one should be, what do we do to get respect and greatness? How do we argue our way into people's homes, their hearts? How do we argue our way into a sale? How do we meaningfully argue our way into what we want in life? We want that superpower where, the Bene Gesserit from Dune, or like there's so many mythos of people whose like voice like commands people. I want to start with that.
Let's talk about that for a second. This is a sensitive subject to both of us because we know the power of public speaking.
Yes.
And I think the general population thinks of public speaking as something they have to do or something. I'm comfortable doing that. But when you get good at it, and I was going to ask you this, when I was reading your intro, you're talking about him starting training at 6. Why don't other parents teach their kids about public speaking? Because that's a sense of discomfort all through your schooling and and your life. So I thought, why don't parents teach that?
Right. Like if you want to really talk about what somebody is going to go into their life with as a skill, we had we're actually, I was supposed to say we're preparing to do an episode about somebody who taught their son to box, to fight from like age 5. And in past episodes, we've talked about, here's a football dad who taught their kid to throw the best spirals from age 5. What kind of skills would your kid go into life with if from like age 5 you taught them how to win arguments and how to actually emotionally affect people, like how to public speak? That's like if you're good at arguing and talking, you can literally get anything. And Jennings Bryan is an example of that.
The sky's the limit. It's so much better than playing the piano, right?
Yeah. I could, if I was good enough, I could walk into a place and ask for a piano. Like I could get a piano from somebody, just and it seems like we are blowing it out of proportion that how much can you really ask for? How much can you really argue for? Like people are eventually going to tell you no. And that's true. But if you know why you're arguing, that is probably the first part is why are you arguing? And teaching somebody to do that from a young age is crazy. So yeah, in this 2-part episode today is going to be how to get respect and greatness through argument. And then I promise the next episode, we're going to talk about how to actually win. That episode will be titled How to Counterpunch Every Argument. And we're going to get into, how do you, if you really want to win, if you want to slaughter somebody in an argument, here's how to do it. If you want to convince somebody meaningfully, like you were talking about with that book you read, how do you convince somebody in a way where it will actually stick and you're not just making them guarded and get into their foxhole and lob grenades back at you? If you're actually trying to draw them out and convince them of your point, how do you do that? So we're starting with, let's teach a kid to be a monster, a master arguer who can ask for anything. How do you do that from the earliest age? So if you're good with it, we'll launch into the history of it and what happened to Bryant. So William Jennings was born in 1860, and his father, from all accounts, was extremely devout, so religious. He was basically a pastor. And to kind of couple that, this very serious, stern looking, the pictures of him, he looks like everyone's disapproving grandfather in his pictures. And on the other side of that, his wife is an extremely funny mother. So Silas is the father. Silas even sounds like a severe name. I'm sorry if anybody out there is named Silas, you're from the 1800s, but that is a tough name. And he's a Baptist, and he's what they called a Copperhead. A Copperhead was a Democrat who supported the North, but they didn't like the idea of going to war at all. They thought that the two sides should just agree to disagree. Meaning
that would have saved a lot of lives if more people believed this, right?
Right, but we would have still had slavery. The Copperheads thought that the South should be allowed to conduct their own business in some degrees, depending on what kind of Copperhead you were. But he was one who thought that if the freed slaves from the South should not be allowed into his state, and he ran on that. He was Illinois should not allow free slaves to enter our state, even though they are free. And he won the election to the state senate in 1852 on that platform. And then he was appointed to be a judge around the time that William Jennings was 6. So like William Jennings never really wanted much. Like they moved into a massive 10-room mansion basically when he was still a kid. And all he knew about his father was like he talks like a preacher or pastor, and he's a judge, and like he's been a state senator. So like his father is like already great at convincing people of pretty much anything. And on the other side of things, there's his mother, who is a Methodist as opposed to a Baptist. So like how serious and severe can the dad be if he's like, well, I'll marry somebody outside of my religion? And it did cause problems. One of the biggest problems was they didn't know where to send William. Like William Jennings was allowed to basically pick his own religion, since mom is a Methodist and dad is a Baptist. But I'm surprised he didn't pick Methodist, because he was being homeschooled by his mom until he was like 10. And since she was so funny and they spent so much time together, it was kind of one of those situations where like, if you're the mom, aren't you going to be like, so why don't you try out this Methodist thing? Like,
Right.
Like,
I just see that the dad is just this really serious, intelligent, powerful person. And the wife is just, or the mom is just so gregarious and sweet and loving and funny. And he's got like the good traits from both, right? Like perfectly
he does.
blended.
Oh, you are dead on. Like, yeah, he's got his mother's humor and his mother's softness, the soft touch sometimes, but he's also got the preacher likeness of his dad, and he's got the skill at arguing like law and ethics of his father, who is a judge. So between the two of them, like it is like you could not have bred a better debater. At age 4, he was giving public speeches, and I think this was probably his dad's doing. I think this was like his father pushing him, like, "Hey, why don't you say something, boy?" And because most of his speeches early on were centered around morals and religion, which I mean, if that's all you hear around the house,
you do that. You show off your kid. Let me show you how smart my kid is. And he was just blowing the other kids away, right?
That is exactly it. And because we have reported on so much history in this podcast, we know from experience, watching kids do fun stuff is what you did for entertainment back then. there was no television, so you would often have like, who's got the smartest 6-year-old, and like push them forward and be like, watch this will be cool. And he quote unquote graduated. I love this. He graduated his mother's homeschooling at age 10. So like she was like, I'm done teaching you your ABCs and your basic math. So about, between 10 and 14, he kind of like picked up what he could from both his mother and father, but he was effectively done with quote unquote school, which there was no state test. I don't know. I don't know how the parents gauged that, but, they started kind of like leaning into him to get into religion more. And at age 14, he chose Baptist. And the reason why is because he had a conversion experience. Now, Todd, I don't know what that means. Like, I kind of have an idea.
Yeah,
but
okay. It means like, it usually means like you were born again, where God spoke to you and you decide, you made a decision to give your life to God. That's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah. It's kind of
okay.
The alcoholics do that when they hand over and say, I'm going to believe in something other than myself, kind of thing. Yeah.
And now that you say that, 14 sounds about right to have that happen. Like that's when you're like looking for something, like you're building your personality. You're
in the olden days, yes. The olden days, you start things younger. Yeah. Nowadays, it's probably 25 after you make some more bad decisions.
Right.
You're hurt by your sins, and then
back then he's an older teenager. He doesn't have any rock and roll to shock his parents with, so he's like, I'll convert hard into this religion. But he said it was the most powerful experience of his life. It cemented him as a Baptist. Go ahead.
This is interesting too, because his education was half spiritual and half schooling, right?
Right.
This is exactly what homeschool parents are going for nowadays. Looks like they nailed it.
Oh yeah, no joke. Like, like the morals and ethics part. I'm like, you sound like you're being homeschooled. That's what parents. That's why people are taking their kids out of school, like especially here in the South. But when he converted at 14, he became what is known as a fundamentalist. And a fundamentalist, I had to. I was familiar with the term. I wanted to make sure I had it right, so I looked it up. It's someone who takes the Bible literally. It's not full of metaphors. It's not stories. Like, it's not like to me, when I was in Sunday school, because I come from a Catholic family, they were stories, but they were recognized as like they're magic stories. They are, the Bible stories are there to teach you a lesson. They may not have literally happened, except if you're a fundamentalist, you believe it actually literally happened that way. Lot's wife was turned into an actual literal pillar of salt. The Genesis took place over this many days. These are historical accounts that are rock solid, which is going to be extraordinarily important on our next episode, because our next episode is going to be also about William Jennings Bryan, somewhat like he's one of the main figures. But our next episode is going to cover the big, huge battle between whether or not we could teach the Bible or evolution in schools. So, like, the knockout, drag-out fight we're having right now to this day in the South. Like, Texas is right now working on legislation to make it to where the Bible can be taught in the school again. This is the battle they had in the, early 1900s. And that was Jennings Bryan. Like, he's the reason why things went the way they did. So we will get into that, but it is important to note here on part one, so he thought the Bible was a historical document.
So his argument is the one we're still arguing about today, that we still see on
Yes.
Fox News. Is that what you're saying? That without
it is.
That's shocking. That means he's a good arguer.
One of the most talented arguers of his time, and what he did and the way he argued is still being echoed, still being repeated today. So if that tells you how important this guy was. And again, the reason why a lot of people haven't heard of him is because he wasn't president. And we'll get into why that happened. Like I don't remember which historian said it, but we forget the losers. If two people run for president, we very quickly forget about the runner-up. Except this guy did it so many times that like he became known as both the great orator and the great loser. So like we'll talk about that too. But after graduating his mother's classes, like we said, he was kind of a bad student in some areas. But he becomes one of the hardest working students to compensate. And he eventually became a valedictorian. We mentioned in the intro narrative that he struggled in like German and a couple other like language-based classes. But he basically just... what did the term when you were doing the narrative for Franklin Delano Roosevelt years ago, you found the term gentleman C's, where like if you're wealthy enough, your professors would just give you a C just so they didn't have to kick you out.
Yeah, the Harvard grades for the alumnus kids who came.
Right. He was not satisfied if he got gentleman C's. He worked his butt off, and like and his professors wrote this. We read one of the quotes that he basically just became a harder worker for the stuff that he couldn't do, and anything to do with ethics, morals, language, he was already knocking it out of the park. And because of that hard work, because he covered his weaknesses, he eventually became valedictorian.
That's interesting too, because most successful people, they don't eliminate their weaknesses. They kind of run with their strengths. So for him to just be so disciplined and competitive, right?
Yeah.
To work in the areas that he's not a pro at.
And that's something I wanted to mention too, is that if there's this old joke about like John Hodgman, the guy that was in those MacBook commercials. He used to go around to parties as a celebrity. He'd go to celebrity parties and he would ask people, would you rather fly or be invisible as a superpower? And anybody who says invisible, he's like, no, you're a criminal at heart. Like he judges them harshly because he's like, you just want to steal stuff and you just want to do things that would be, you just want to get away with things because like that's what you do if you go invisible. him being able to argue his way into anything at such an early age, I would have thought that would have made him worse of a student. If I was able to argue with my professors in a way where they change their morals, which is something they talk about in his biography, I would also be arguing my way out of not doing work. I'd be like, hey, how about you let me slide on doing this homework? Or, oh, I had that homework. My dog ate it. And you believe it because I'm William Jennings Bryan. No, that's not the case.
Or like any entitled child, right?
Yeah.
I'm so brilliant. Why do I have to do all this that everyone else has to do?
Right. But he didn't do that. He, by all accounts, he actually buckled down, and he's like, okay, if I can't learn German from this book, I'll attend the prep academy specifically for like this language class or this Latin or whatever. So he really did put in a lot of work to get to valedictorian. And then after that, after he graduated, the first time he really like slaughters with debate is the debate club tournament that happens after graduating college. It's like a post-grad thing they did, and the town showed up. Like it's a college town, and like people from the neighboring area would like come to just watch because it's entertainment and it's the 1800s, so there's no TV. And by the way, every point I make is going to end with the phrase "there's no TV," just because like I want to put that.
Well,
in perspective.
I do want to throw this in there because of this year in the 1800s. Taking German then would be like us taking Spanish now, because there were so many German immigrants. So you could probably go to a restaurant and talk German. I know that sounds crazy, but back then it would have been the same thing.
Actually, I hadn't thought about that, but when that puts that into perspective, like I'm living in an area that has a lot of German names, like Pflugerville and things like that, and it's like,
that's when they were all coming. That's when they were all coming. So it would be easier to practice it, because now it's like it's a one-off class, but you have to go to college for that. But
he could go to the local eatery and like practice his German by speaking to somebody who's prepping his food. So he probably won this debate. The college paper says he won and that he was robbed by score, that they basically like were like, no, you came in second. Good try, kid. But even the woman who came in first place, and I could not find, because I was watching this part I got out of a documentary, and we'll link it in our sources. I forgot who he won, but it was against another fairly famous person. So it was like the woman he won against like was like a writer or something. And she's like, no, he won. Like William Jennings took it. Like you just scored him differently. So he was he was a challenge student in some areas, but he's, like we mentioned, he's also really bad at propriety, especially when it comes to women. And I don't mean that in like a term of like he was a predator. We mean just like he kind of knew he could argue his way into things, and he tested that quite a lot when he was dating. Like he started to date Mary Baird, his future wife, and he dated her while her mother was in a mental asylum, and like he would go to the asylum to like talk to Mary. And like he would just be, I can just imagine him like arguing with like the nurses at the front or the person manning the counter or something, be like, no, I'm supposed to be here. But he also snuck into her campus to see her, and like it became problematic. Like he kept sneaking to places, and when I say sneaking, I mean like probably just arguing his way past door guards and like people who should be like watching out for stray boys who might want to like kiss with girls and things like that. But it became a problem. He snuck into her campus one too many times, got her suspended for a semester, and that was big. It's not like a normal college suspension where you're just like, okay, I'll get a slap on the wrist and I'll just re-enter on academic probation or whatever. This was different. They sent her home. Like she got suspended. They're like, well, get on the train and beg forgiveness from your parents is what they told her to do.
And this is a different time. This is when your church would disown you, and this was she would be a ruined woman. This is a big deal.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. This for them, this is a wake-up call. This is like she's going home to beg to her parents, but also she's going home for her parents to give her the talk of, if you don't straighten out, your reputation will be ruined forever and you'll never have a good husband. And she's ready for that. Like she gets on the train, she brings all her stuff. She is going to go have the splash of cold water that she needs and get back on track. But while she's sitting on the train, like mentally trying to prepare for what her parents are going to do to her, probably suspend her or lock her down until her schooling is over. While the train is about to go, the baggage door opens in the train, and in walks William Jennings Bryan. He had talked his way onto the train, stowed away in the baggage, and just surprised her by walking out and like walking into the aisle. And then he tells her, "I brought a ring," and it's not a full proposal. He doesn't get down on one knee, but he basically says he's going to talk to her dad, her father, and tell her father that he's not some. And his quote, the phrase he uses, I'm not some fast young man. And obviously Mary has hesitations about that, and she's like, "You're crazy. My father. Do you know who my father is?"
Exactly. This is serious.
Yeah. And so they take the train to her house. She eventually agrees, and like, even though he's a stowaway, he's like, I don't know what they checked tickets, so at some point he had to talk his way out of the ticket checker, like throwing him off the train at the next stop. But they made it.
That was easy for him.
That's small potatoes. Yeah. For somebody like him, he's
yeah.
He's just like, I left it in my other coat, and that happens to be your coat. Give me your coat. Like, I could just imagine the extreme amount of convincing he could do. But he basically followed her home and went in, and it went exactly like he thought it would. He talked to her father. Her father used the same phrase, said that you're not some fast young man. I get it. And agreed to let him propose to Mary once he was self-sufficient. So he's just out of college, but he doesn't really have a job yet, and he's not set up, and he doesn't have a business or anything like that. He's going to be a lawyer. That's the plan. Is William Jennings is the best arguer on earth right now. So his plan is I'll go into law because that's what my degree is. But the father's like, no, you need a business first, and then you can fully actually propose to my daughter. While I was reading that, it made me think about how we get into argument professionally today. Like, reading that was like, I don't think I know anybody online. Like, I watch The Legal Eagle, which is a channel on YouTube. I watch other lawyers on YouTube argue things, not criminal cases, but like they present arguments and things like that. And I started realizing while watching YouTube and watching debaters in prepping for this episode, a lot of them are not actually convincing anyone of anything. They're not out in the real world doing the convincing. They're just making their money out of being convincing online for the sake of being convincing. Like, they're not changing anything. They're not out in the street. Like, they're not in the halls of DC. They're not actually making progress. They're just being as elegant as possible, and like they're making people nod their heads in agreement. And that's how they make their money, is making a show of argument. And I was wondering if we could talk about, is that worth anything? Because it seems like it's all my YouTube feed is nowadays.
This is debate. This is very interesting because I didn't realize what a big business this was. So that you pretty much nailed it. But I want to start with, I do watch this, but they watch it on sports shows. Do it now, where they have sports writers who get on and argue about the games and about the people and about the drama, and they gossip about the things. And it gets huge. I enjoy watching that as much as I enjoy watching the games.
Yeah,
because I know how certain people are, and they argue and they get heated. They sometimes have to be separated. Well, but that's all done by the networks, but done by ESPN and by Fox Sports. But this wasn't online, and they have these viral threads, and they'll get two people up there. It was referred to as kind of like nerdy WWE. So instead of body slams, they're using their words and they're using their wit. And so the threads play out, and they kind of escalate the arguments, and then the people get kind of caught up in it, almost like the tension in a movie or a book, you know?
I remember you talking about this in an earlier episode, and you were talking about it like it's manufactured sometimes. Like that they will be disagreeing on sports seemingly to just disagree and to generate this this argument.
They do, and they're saying things extremely. There's no gray. They'll call someone a terrible person and this and that just to get more views. And when you start to see it, you kind of see, do they really feel this strongly about this? And the language they use, they get real loud, they get real animated, they get real aggressive, and it's a lot of times too, a lot of it's just being spoken into their ears. This is what I thought interesting. So now the NFL owners and, who own the NFL teams, I think there's 32 teams or something. They are getting pressure from social media because fans have direct contact with those people now. That was never a thing. And they read these people's comments, and it affects these multi-million-dollar coaching and player decisions that they make. The fact the fact that their grandchild will show them a TikTok video that makes fun of them bothers them. So it lands. It's got real power. It's got real weight, even though it's from people who are not football experts. They're just local fans. And the more inappropriate, the more aggressive, the more, the swearing, the cussing, those are the ones that get the most attention.
Okay. I didn't even think about sports when we were writing this episode. Like, I was thinking about, like, was that guy from the Daily Show on there's like Jordan Klepper who goes around arguing with people at rallies, and there's like Ben Shapiro on the right who like argues people down on online for a living.
I just asked you a question.
And I asked you a question. You failed to answer a single one of mine. Frankly, I find this whole thing a waste of time.
I didn't think about how people in sports, like, they're making or breaking their careers off of arguing for other sports stars. Like, nobody has thrown a ball yet in this discussion.
Yeah.
It's just people like winning an argument about who is, who is valuable for a team.
And there's no culpability when all these outrageous claims and predictions don't come true, which they never do. It never goes down like these experts who played the game 20 years. It never does. But they never apologize and say, oh, I was wrong. Or if that guy has a great game, they never say, oh, I'm sorry. Never. They're just on to the next fight. They're on to bad mouthing somebody else. But I do want to talk about how this has been in our society for before we were around. So it started out, when this country was formed, debating was something that people were influenced for. That's what Congress was. You were supposed to go and argue and debate and get things for your people back home. That's what your job was. So you go down there and people would come and watch it just like you would a sporting event. They were like gladiators. And then they started doing them kind of more like almost like TED Talks, where instead of TED Talks where someone just comes up and says their thing, two people get up and argue. And they'd have these at halls and stuff. But they were political at first, and they got less political, and they became more like duels just for like entertainment. So instead of drawing pistols, you and I would meet down at the Moda Center in Portland, and 10,000 people would watch us argue.
Right. I remember that from our a Benedict Arnold episode, how like Congress is just a place where you like try to argue your way into the most resources for your home state. It wasn't about the United States. It was, what can I pull from this pool of resources?
And if you fast forward, of course, to today, right? Now it's social media. And now you have these threads of these bubbles of political and then just disinterest. And they let the people show, they go to the top. The most views are for the more angrier voices, the more aggressive voices, nastier language, the low blows. So they really reward the bullying. Those get shared 50 times more than like educated, well thought out, polite rebuttal.
Yeah.
So the bullying is pays better than,
How often have you seen the phrase "salty tears" in your research? Because that's I don't know where that became such a hot phrase, and I don't know why so many people click on that looking at these YouTube videos of people argue bullying other people.
It just seems so mean, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Don't you want to comfort somebody when it just has no compassion?
Well, I more want to convince people. I want to make people like, I want to pull a Jennings Bryan. I want people to like let me marry their daughter and give me education, and like I want opportunities. I don't want to like make people feel bad or to prove them wrong in a way where like they dislike me and they will never think the way I think. That's terrible, and that's the least productive thing I could be doing. But I think that's what's getting rewarded. I think that's what's making money is.
And that's the thing. Like, so a tweet or a post that's structured, that's neutral, that's factual, is almost invisible. But if I call Joe an idiot or a loser, I get 100 times the attention. And so we are so driven by the attention, the likes, the views, that is our dopamine, that it's almost like an athlete who is going to lose their job unless they do steroids. And they say, well, I'm against that. It's against my core belief, but eventually you're not going to be able to play anymore unless you do steroids. So then they finally do,
Yeah.
But it's kind of like it's supercharging the worst parts of our personality, right?
Did you ever catch that documentary about social media? Like, it was a lot of interviews were from like one of the ex-directors at Google or whatever. But it was all about how social media works with our mind. And they talked about how a tweet or a message, it's what you said. It's not just that things that are written neutrally or spoken neutrally. Not only does it not get traction, if it has negative terms about another party, it has like even more spread. And if it has like things that are verifiably false but are exciting, it gets even more spread. Like lies spread 14 times faster than the truth, apparently. Or it. I wish I had the metrics on hand, but it was crazy. Like, it was like, yeah, if to harken back to our earlier argument, if I tell you why the price of gas is high and I use all the facts and I make this complicated argument versus somebody who is like, nope, it's these people's fault. It's so much faster. It's so much quicker. And it is like greased the way it slides out onto the internet.
That's well put. I think you've touched on it multiple times. You kind of littered it through this episode. It kind of the part about being invisible. So you don't have you're safe. This is not like when you're in the 7th grade and you want to do a suicidal thing by you try to tease the bully of the school, right? You would never do that to their face, right? You wouldn't even gossip about them because you'd be afraid it would get back to them. But when you're behind a screen or on your phone, you are invisible.
Yeah. There's a joke online of like being an internet tough guy, or say that you wouldn't say that to my face kind of stuff. But I also think a lot of these people wouldn't say what they're saying without a camera on them. That so much about the way people argue and just debate, it's entirely performative. I and this is not just opinion. Like we did an episode all about outrage and how well it sells. I think that almost everything we see in politics, almost everything we see in like even like Senate hearings and congressional meetings, and like people who have a YouTube channel where they put a sign in front of their desk that says, debate me on this issue. It's all performative, and you have to be angry and score points and be passionate and enthusiastic. But in reality, it's like, well, no, that's not how you actually convince people.
It is, and that's the big takeaway. It's just entrenching people in their own ideas more, and the more outrageous, the more rude it is. You're going to get more likes or follows, which means you're going to get more revenue on the paid platforms. So they're just investing people, just getting people upset.
Yeah. Have you ever heard the term sophistry?
No, not until this episode. What does it mean?
Okay. I don't want to take over your talking points, but something it comes from a philosophy class. Basically, it's an old term that came from like Socrates and like Plato, like those days of philosophy. And the idea was that if you just debated to make money, you were a sophist. That was what you did. Like you're not trying to change the world for the better. You're just doing it to get people to pay attention to you and hand over cash. And a lot of these early sophists that were like arguing against philosophers, arguing against people who really wanted to change the world for the better, a lot of them were trying to like score points and get angry and get those outrage clicks in the early like Athenian days. And the way they were doing it is they were teaching nobles' sons, like rich kids basically, to argue better. And those people who made their money doing that were called the sophists. And that's what it feels like YouTube is. It's a return to sophistry.
It does. And none of it's based on truth. It's just based on you can go down any hole you want and make anything up. It's just fiction, right? It's just muddy in the water for somebody who's trying to do some good,
Right.
It doesn't sound like politics, doesn't it?
It does, and it sounds like the sophists have won. Like they were limited to a single king pays them to teach their son to debate better. Now it's like we all pay them because it's more entertaining to watch their YouTube channel than somebody who is just quietly explaining the science of something.
I think it's tricky the online ones because it's kind of structured like you're learning something, right?
Yeah,
it isn't like watching the sports ones that I do. This is like this would appeal to an intellectual, that they're getting these opinions and this so-called research,
Right. I think the difference is like there's a difference between wanting to be correct and wanting to have the world-changing idea versus what makes money now, which is to be heard loudly and to make money being heard.
You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where you'll find show notes, links, and resources. And that is also where you can catch the next parts 2 and 3 to our debate series.